Okay, yeah, I'm Quinn Agathoni. That's only one of the people I am. I'm also Alpin Edwards. I performed at the nights that Jason set up beginning about a year ago, just after I'd finished having radiotherapy and my cancer went away. So. I'm the lead singer of a band called Ecog Zero, but right now I'm being Quinn Agathoni. And I should say this thing that he says at the beginning of the book, because it's plants and thing. This is prose, by the way. And what I should say is this: Bourne and surrounding villages are in the wapentakes of Kesteven and Holland in South Lincolnshire. But I've taken such liberties with history and geography as I felt necessary for the story. And any resemblance between characters depicted herein and any persons living or dead are entirely coincidental, not to mention extremely far-fetched. Now, anyone who knows me on Facebook knows that I promised to read chapter 5, but that was a joke, because one of the deliberate mistakes which Jason spoke about earlier is I haven't done a chapter 5. It goes straight from 4 to 6. But I'm going to start with chapter 2 anyway. I'm the god of small-town life, howled the gale, pressing her backward even though the air was still. You'll never leave this place, you're mine. Janie kept running through the tumult though, and the voices faded into silence. That was the first time she ran along the Spalding Road from 20 to Bourne, but it was not the last. Over the weeks, the voices faded away as her daily act of defiance became routine. Her arguments with Peter also cooled. The old man seemed to grow older as the days wore on, as if the effort to admonish Janie had exhausted his capacity for wrath, or indeed of any other kind of emotion. Janie ate and ran in silence, spending more and more time in the small market town on the edge of the fens. She'd come to Bourne to escape the clamour of London, and that had worked. Brunians were a quiet folk, never bothering strangers, although never trusting, never welcoming either. Janie recalled some of H.P. Lovecraft's stories and wondered if perhaps the common South Lincolnshire look she saw on so many faces could be classed like that Innsmouth look as a sign of monsters in the family tree. She giggled at the thought, but it stayed there. Perhaps they were all related instead, and it was inbreeding rather than the genes of monsters that gave them all that tawny, fair-haired, muddy look. It was quiet, though the sun was warm, and she soon discovered there was an outdoor swimming pool where everybody came in the afternoon to absorb the sun like so many green plants. The attendant told her that a mile was 32 lengths of the pool, and so she added that to her daily routine. Run from 20 to Bourne, 32 lengths of the swimming pool, run around the Abbey lawn, pause in to watch if there was football, cricket, tennis, or even crazy golf going on. Then pass to the library, which had fewer books than Olivia kept at home, let alone a proper library, and so to lunch. And to begin with, her run had been accompanied by Eastern European rock music in the languages of her childhood. Slowly, though, that changed, and she began to run instead to Every Day Is Exactly the Same by 9 Inch Nails. Now that, she thought, was her subconscious speaking. Whatever had been whispering had taken her rebellion and knitted it into complacent, repetitive action as if she were an animal in a zoo. One day she tried to change the routine. Instead of running westward along Spalding Road, she turned along the fen run and ran north instead, until the road itself took a right angle and she found herself in Dyke, a prettier village than 20 with some signs of community. And yet it was a sullen community, much like Bourne itself. The people looked the same, perhaps with a hint of red in their sandy hair, or maybe a green shoot in their mud-coloured eyes. She took a coffee in a pub. It was nothing like the Turkish coffee she would usually drink, but the alternative was warm, muddy English beer. Refreshed, she ran on until she found herself on the A15 north of Bourne. She decided to turn right. She was sure she had done, and yet her feet chose to turn left, southward, and back into Bourne. "Foolish little chicken," said the voice inside her. "You're mine now, and in my domain you will stay." There was another village on the right. It was called Cawthorpe, and boasted that it was home to a conference centre. Janie shrugged. That sounded even worse than a whisper's realm itself. She ran on into Bourne. There were other days, bright and sunny days, when the light glittered on the ornamental pond in the memorial gardens and she watched the koi carp lazily swimming around the limits of their world. There was shelter in the corner of the garden, by the river, where the willows stood weeping in solidarity with walnut trees who were awaiting a beating. Janie smiled a little at that, imagining that that was where young Brunians came and went for casual fucks on warm spring afternoons. There was none of that today, though. The place was deserted, except for a couple of thrushes in the throes of a violent territorial dispute. Janie was almost disappointed. She remembered similar couplings in a bandstand by the river roading with Finn. Now, why had her mind turned to Finn in all this time? She hoped it was a good sign. "For fuck's sake, Janie," declared a new voice within, Finn's voice. "Fuck are you keeping in that head of yours? No, don't tell me. Jesus, Janie, haven't I told you about letting demons in?" Jane began to protest, but Finn didn't need to breathe, and so he didn't stop long enough to get into this long-sided conversation. "Oh, but it's not in your head, is it? Your head's in it." "Well, it ain't hell, 'cause you ain't dead, and I know that 'cause I am, and trust me, I'd know if you were." "In here," he said, and led her, voice calling the while, into a shadowy, abandoned cottage, long used for cows and pigs or something equally stinky. But it was the shadow more than the stink she wanted, because in the darkness... Finn smiled as he grew visible to Janie's sight. He stood there as full as life as ever, with his black eyes blazing above his ruddy cheeks. Dark curly hair formed a chaotic halo around that crooked smile of his. He looked as young as he had when a careless moment let the vampire take him, and yet Providence had snapped his neck before the vampire could make him one of them, and now he was a ghost, and what a gorgeous ghost at that. "Damn it, Janie, that ain't fair. I've been dead for 5 years and you still look like a teenager." Janie knew that was no exaggeration. The woman of her line did age well. That's why so many are being burned over the centuries. Even princesses can burn, especially when it becomes something of a family tradition, a destiny even. Janie smiled back at him. Death has been kind to you, Finn, but then you always knew it would, didn't you? After all, it owed you so many favours. In life, Finn had been a shaman, although nothing like the stereotype. Instead of animal skins and horns and feathers, Finn would dress in no-label jeans, which he swore he made himself, even though Janie had seen for herself that his hands were hardly ever steady enough for him to roll his own spliffs, let alone sew. Then again, they were old, older than his Waterboys t-shirt, and even his ancient beyond retro baseball boots, so it's just possible that he made the jeans before the drugs and booze had taken their toll. Of course, though, he didn't look like the stereotype, but he did smell like the stereotype. Janie found this exciting in itself, and not just because it would piss off whoever had been charged with protecting her morals at that time. He'd also kept at the back of the untidy thatch of curly hair a long, neat, dark rat tail, in respect, or so he claimed, of his totem animal. Janie had suspected that Finn's shamanism was nothing but a pose, and perhaps an excuse to save money on deodorant. That changed the first time the two of them fucked. Finn had taken her with him to the underworld, and had stared deep into her eyes as if he were a shiny black kingfisher diving for fish in the grey pools of her own. Princess Jadwiga, he'd whispered, or asked, or explained, although in truth it was a mixture of all. "You get that one quiet, didn't you?" Janie had sighed. Irritation had undulated beneath her unaccountably scaly hide. "Would you have believed me, rat boy?" she'd ask. "And if you had, would you still have fucked me?" He'd given that some thought before answering. "Fair point, probably not. And that would have been a shame, because I love you, Janie Hunyadi, or Jadwiga of Banat, or Lizard from Crow's Egg, or whatever other names you'll choose to bear, and I'll love you beyond death." Finn smiled at Janie in the darkness as they reminisced and said, "I wasn't lying, was I?" Janie shook her head. "You weren't lying, but 5 years! What were you waiting for, Finn? Were you watching me with my other loves?" "Mostly no. Although that girl you got in London, the cop, she's fucking gorgeous. Shame she don't do drugs. I bet she tastes like heaven." Finn smiled wistfully while Janie blushed at the thought of the taste of Kate, and Finn's smile became a grin. "Hey, no worries, love. I'm dead. Jealousy would be bloody pointless for either of us." "Oh, which one of you do you think I'm jealous of?" Clearly Finn had lost the capacity to blush. Fair point again, he said. Point is, though, I said I'd love you beyond death, and I do. And the reason I've waited so long is you have never been in anything like so much trouble as you are now.